Hello, and welcome to another edition of Focus One. Today we're going to get a Tea Party perspective on a variety of political issues, including the GOP primary race, debt and taxes, the Obama health care law, and other priority areas for the Tea Party Manatee. My guest is Steve Vernon, Vice President of Tea Party Manatee. Steve, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Steve, before we start out, again, I just want to clarify for our viewers that you're not here representing the official position of Tea Party Manatee or Tea Parties around the country, but rather you're giving us your own perspective, and it's a Tea Party perspective because of your position in the Tea Party Manatee. Okay. So with that out of the way, certainly a big week for the Obama administration with respect to its health care law. We had 3 days of oral arguments before the Supreme Court. I can't really recall this much drama in quite some time.
Right.
And one of the things that happens in these hearings, obviously in this particular case, I think most justices might have already known where they're going to be on the case. And so there's a lot of posturing, a lot of theater, but they do tip their hands a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most folks or most pundits knew that if there was going to be a couple of swing votes, the key one was probably Anthony Kennedy, and even the Justice Stevens perhaps could have swung in support. Based upon their questions this week, they did not express much love for the individual mandate, which is the key, I think, in the Supreme Court case. And so it looks as if the chances of the individual mandate getting struck down and found unconstitutional by the Supreme Court are pretty high right now. It remains to be seen how much beyond that they'll go in terms of striking down the law. They perhaps might strike down the entire law. So given that, I think the Tea Party, this has been a cause célèbre for them almost, for the last 2 years.
Yes.
I assume there must be some, if not pleasure, some positive feelings. Why don't you just react to what you've heard this past week?
More than positive feelings, joy, because we definitely believe that it will be struck down. Now, we also believe it'll be a 5-4 decision. Because the liberal judges, they're not going to vote against the individual mandate. And we suspected that Judge Scalia and Judge Thomas and Judge Alito would definitely be on the other side of that and strongly oppose it. We weren't really sure where Judge Kennedy or the Chief Justice would end up. But based on the analysis, that we have made and viewing all the different C-SPAN repeats, we think definitely it'll be struck down, and rightly so. With respect to it being struck down, I think one of the things that prior to the hearings that should have been understood is sometimes justices ask tough questions that might belie where they really stand. But in this case, again, Kennedy's questions in particular, this would be one of the greatest head fakes of all time. Yes.
If in fact he were to go the other way. Now, I think let's assume for a second that the individual mandate component of the health care law is found to be unconstitutional. Mm-hmm. There is a whole lot of other stuff within the health care law. Much of that might not be unconstitutional per se. How far do you think the court's going to go in terms of striking down other parts of the law? How far would you like them to go? And then I think I'm going to come back in a little bit to whether or not other parts are struck down. That individual mandate is sort of a key financing mechanism for lots of other stuff that they're trying to do. So from a practicality standpoint, the rest of the law becomes in trouble. So just react to where you think they're going to go in terms of...
Well, definitely we would very much like to see the whole law struck down. Even though there are certain good parts to it, we think the House was constructed on a very weak foundation, and we would like to see it totally struck down. And Judge Scalia made a very good point. He said, where have we ever struck down the heart of a bill and let the rest of the bill stand? And so we think that's absolutely correct. And we can't separate out individual provisions that may or may not be directly reliant upon the funding source of individual mandate. We believe that they have to strike down the whole law because there's 2,700 pages, and as Judge Scalia pointed out, why should the Supreme Court go through 2,700 pages and figure out, well, maybe this won't have to be struck because it doesn't directly depend on the mandate? And he said, I'm certainly not going to read 2,700 pages and decide what I think should or shouldn't be put in. And he says, I'm not even going to have my clerks do it. You know, the fact is that that's untenable. Plus, that is not the function of the Supreme Court. That is the function of Congress. So we believe he should, you know, the Supreme Court should say it's totally unconstitutional. You go back, Congress, and figure out what you want to do, what you think is salvageable, what you think will essentially come into law without this individual mandate. It may be very difficult.
Well, let's go there. So let's say the healthcare law, you know, for all intent and purposes, is either completely found to be unconstitutional or just mortally wounded. So it's sent back to Congress, back to the drawing board. Our healthcare system is, well, there might be some that are happy with it. There is now a little bit of a state of chaos because there is some transition that's been going on around the country. So I want to come back to some of the problems that a lot of folks have recognized within the system, looking at things that we care about, the sort of the cost of healthcare,
right.
Coverage issues that would include, again, people that are covered or not, but also, I think, consumer protections. And so there's a lot of us that, you know, get upset that the way that you make money as a healthcare, you try to figure out how not to cover people that are sick because you lose money on them. And so they try to build some protections into the healthcare law. And then we have issues of quality and choice that matter, I think, a lot to us. Our system, compared to other systems, is one in which I think the costs are exorbitant. The system is designed so that you make money off of doing volume, not necessarily curing people. It's a volume-based system. We've got coverage issues statewide, nationwide. I think quality-wise, it's a little tricky in that some of the best healthcare options in the world are right here in this country.
Yes.
And we do have choice, but there are some constraints on choice depending upon the state of you might not have too many choices depending upon how healthy you are, and to the extent that you have health management organizations running, sometimes they do constrain choices in terms of what they'll pay for and whatnot. So if we go back, if the Obama healthcare law is struck down, and you don't have to give the Tea Party perspective per se, but just some of your own thoughts. Is the status quo, I think, you know, the least worst among a number of evils, or is there some other type of reform approach that you would be supportive, that you think can do a better job, again, of bringing down costs, expanding coverage, maintaining some sort of choice and high quality?
I believe that we need to do something with the healthcare system. I don't believe it works well enough. We need to make improvements. How we do it is the key. We think the way Mr. Obama did it was totally wrong. And of course they pulled some shenanigans, they being the Democratic Party, because they bypassed the 60 vote limit in the Senate by calling it a budget bill when it really wasn't. It was creating a whole new regime like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and all the rest. And not one Republican voted for it.
They did use the budget reconciliation process to avoid a filibuster. From the reverse direction, though, there's a lot of the way that the filibuster is used these days. It's actually turned the Senate into a supermajority decision process, which makes it very difficult to do much of to get a House majority, a Senate supermajority, and a president that's willing to approve something. Very high bar to get. It is.
It's very hard. It's a high bar to essentially jump over, but that is the process that we're following. Now, they just circumvented it by calling it something like a budget bill when it wasn't. It was the establishment of a new program.
Fair point.
So that you know, we have to take into consideration that this was a one-sided law. So when my idea is get together, come up with a compromise, figure out what will work, what won't work. And the main component of that is cost. Okay, because essentially you have the insurance companies, and they even told Mr. Obama from the very start, you can't increase 50 million more people, you know, and give them coverage without having some additional cost offset. Mm-hmm. Totally makes sense from a business standpoint. So that's why they came up with the individual amendment. The only trouble with that is it's unconstitutional.
Just a little point of, there's 2 points I just wanted to make, and we'll move on to the GOP primary stuff.
Sure.
One was there was a lot of talk early on in the healthcare debate about the single provider, or you know, having the government step in and provide a government-backed federal healthcare insurance option. Which the irony, I think, is that probably wouldn't have had a problem constitutionally. It just politically, I think it couldn't. It was unsellable politically, and so in the end, I think what the Democrats did is they attempted to work within a more market-oriented framework, but the lever for making that work was an individual mandate, which gets struck down by the Supreme Court. It's a bit of irony in that one.
That's right. It was ironical in that they chose one way. But they chose the unconstitutional way. So I would like to see both the Democrats and Republicans get together. We know they can come up with compromises, you know, and let's see if we can't make the thing work, even from a cost standpoint. You know, competition is the essence of a competitive market. More competitors you have in a market, the lower the cost. Right now, you have individual states saying, okay, we can only have like 3, you know, insurance companies for our state. Now, if we could open up the market,
yeah, I think
that's right. That would drive down
that'll probably
costs.
be a part of what ends up coming one way or the other. One other, and this is more of for me, a chuckle at both the left and the right, is right now there's just a lot of angst on the part of the left with what they perceive as judicial activism, reversing the will of the folks that is expressed through congressional action or legislative action.
Right.
I've seen certainly both at the federal and state levels a lot of angst on the part of the right directed at the court system for what they perceive as judicial activism, striking down the will of the so going forward in the future, do you think we'll continue to see hypocrisy, or maybe we'll just, on both sides, or will we just kind of come to terms with sometimes the courts will just take away something that the legislature...
Well, you'll have a lot of lower courts still practicing judicial activism. But it was very telltale to me that the conservative justices basically were saying, well, in fact, Judge Kennedy said, this is something we have never done before. This is something where you are putting a burden on individual citizens to make an affirmative action. That's never been done. So you are essentially changing the relationship on a very basic level between the citizen and the government. And the conservative justice says, we believe we have to look at what the Constitution said, what the Founding Fathers intended, and we have to make a decision as to whether or not it's constitutional or not. Now, Judge Ginsburg then comes up with the notion of, well, why shouldn't we try to salvage the law by going through the 2,700 pages and deciding which is appropriate, which is a good idea to keep or not keep. That is judicial activism, because that's not the job of the Supreme Court. That is the job of Congress. So that right there, you got a totally distinct dichotomy between activism on the liberal judge's side and essentially simply deciding constitutional.
As a counterpart, I think there are other precedents of components of laws being struck down by the Supreme Court.
Yes.
But let's move on to the primary.
Okay.
Move on to the primary.
Let's
We've
do
eaten
it.
up a good amount of time, but I think it was definitely worthwhile given what the coverage that the health care law had this week. Mitt Romney,
Yes.
is he going to win? Is he going to be your nominee?
He will be the nominee for the Republican Party.
How do you feel about that?
I, like many others, wanted a more conservative, a true basic conservative, to be the nominee.
And within the field, how would you rank in terms of the stronger or the weaker candidates? And again, this is not the Tea Party perspective, but maybe your own perspective. Santorum, would he be your preferred candidate?
Yeah, he's the one I voted for in the primary.
Okay.
Only because some of my other favorites, Herman Cain, got into problems, unrelated to politics. And then, sir.
Well, I want to go back to Herman Cain. When did you become a fan of Herman Cain? Was it during the Florida event where the P5 where
Presidency 5? He was dynamic. He was direct. He made sense. Boy, if you were there, the enthusiasm was unreal. And we saw in our congregation, Manatee County, we saw numerous people who started out with Perry or Ginsburg, and they switched over to Herman Cain, simply because of
his performance at that.
Yep, exactly. So that's when I really started enjoying the Herman Cain perspective.
Did you have any concerns over? There were some lapses in terms of some public policy issues, some stuff on foreign policy, and then
Yeah, that's not his major strength. But I would take, in this day and age, with our current problems, I would take a businessman's sense of what we need to do versus a politician's sense. So that's why I really enjoyed it. I became the Manatee County chairman for the Herman Cain campaign.
Okay, yeah, so
yeah,
big supporter. So you were sad to see sort of the scandal end up bringing him down.
Yes, it was sad, and it was sad, and I wish that whole thing didn't occur. And as far as how true individual instances were or were not, that's not really the issue. The issue was the outcome. He couldn't overcome it.
I want to come to Santorum, and just from a pure, almost campaign management perspective. I want to pick on him a little bit and just get your reaction. He had that run in February where, looking at the demographics, you kind of knew he was going to win Minnesota, and nobody was really going to show up in Missouri, given the fact that it didn't count. Colorado was a surprise. So he had that sweep. He had the spotlight. Right. He had nothing. You didn't have another contest really or a debate for the better part of 3 weeks. From my standpoint, I thought that he pretty much had people that were really, their votes were driven by social conservative issues. He had those folks locked down. And I think that in the field, he's one of the more competent speakers on economic policy as well as defense policy. He certainly is. He might even be positioned as the biggest hawk. And he has a little bit of his blue collar, And so I thought, he's got the next 3 weeks to pivot and persuade people that he's really not simply wanting to use a bully pulpit to push a social agenda, but rather he's a serious candidate, And then one day after another, I just pick up the paper, and there's just another headline by some kind of wacky thing he seems to be saying. What happened during those 3 weeks?
What happened was the media. And in my personal opinion, the media is so very liberally biased. So what they did was they decided, hey, let's make this person out as an extremist. Let's take his social positions and let's make them as extreme looking as possible.
In defense of the media, though, he kept feeding them. So
well, he kept trying to explain, and the more he tried to explain, the more they dissected his explanation. So, that I think that was a mistake on his part from a strategy standpoint. I think he should have just, left it instead of trying to explain and explain and explain. That was my...
Okay, so you acknowledge that you're likely going to, Mitt Romney will likely be your nominee. Will the Tea Party line up behind him? Will they line up behind him reluctantly but faithfully? Will they find some sort of enthusiasm? Will it depend upon his choice of a vice presidential candidate?
Yeah, and when you say Tea Party, your nominee, here's the situation.
Yeah, again, well, a lot of, I'd say, even I would broaden that out. I think Mitt Romney has had some problems with the conservative base. So with respect to the establishment, he's doing great. But with respect to the rank and file conservative base voters, a bit suspicious of him.
Yeah, now, everyone in the Tea Party, at least Tea Party Manatee, is a true conservative. Believe it or not, we did a survey of, about a month or so ago, maybe 2 months now, and we asked people, are you a Republican, are you a Democrat, or are you an independent? The vast majority of people said they were independents. Now, they only essentially tend towards being Republicans or supporting Republican candidates because we can't find too many Democratic conservatives. So I would say from a Republican standpoint, Romney will be. And I also believe that once he is, and this unfortunate squabbling between the candidates, Santorum and Newt Gingrich, who's got a kind of a personal vendetta against Romney.
He's still a little mad.
Yeah, he's still a little mad. Essentially, once Romney is selected, then we will see a much, much greater support for the man.
Is he going to win?
He will.
You think he's going to, you're confident that he'll win the general election?
Yeah, I'm confident he will win the general election because I think Mr. Obama has just too many deficits. His main positive aspect of himself is the fact that he is likable, but his ideas are just so extreme. It should be obvious to people that he's not the right person to be president.
Let's run through a couple of scenarios, one with Romney as president, and then we'll come back to the possibility of an Obama second term. Mm-hmm. Romney gets elected. There's lots of angst across the nation with respect to what I think they rightly perceive as paralysis in Washington. And so the inability of Democrats and Republicans to come together in Congress, and then that relationship between Congress as a whole and the president. Do you think things would get better under a Romney administration, and what's to prevent, say, again, a bunch of disaffected Democrats from, again, adopting a very similar strategy to the Republicans in the last cycle, which is unless you've got enough votes to overcome a filibuster, you're getting nothing done. What do you think? Do you think we're going to have that under a Romney presidency as well, or is there something about Romney, or do you think that the Republicans are just going to not only take over the Senate, but they're going to end up with 60-plus senators?
I think it may not be a filibuster-proof Senate, but I think it's going to be a very strong showing for the Republicans, and I think they'll be in the mid-50s. And then they essentially will get consensus from the conservative Democrats, like Joe Manchin in West Virginia and other people. And if you tap into some of those conservative, they're very few, but conservative Democrats, you can get a consensus. You can overcome that 60%, even if you don't have it, in totally in the Republican Party having 60 people. So I think that will help a lot. I think the Republicans will gain seats in Congress. So if it
So
was
you essentially think that if the broad features of the agenda that's being pushed by the House Republicans in the current Congress, you think that that will actually have some potential to be realized through a receptive Senate that can overcome a filibuster, as well as a president that will put the stamp of approval on it?
Yes.
Okay, from a budget and a variety of other perspectives.
Right.
I want to, before we move off, if that doesn't happen and the Obama, we have a second term,
Right.
Would you like to see the standoff continue? Or let me give you a hypothetical. Let's say Obama pivots and comes back and embraces something that looks like the Bowles-Simpson plan for reducing budgets, where in order to get that budget reduction, you're going to see a 70, maybe 3/4 of that will come through spending cuts, where you'll take on some of the entitlement taboos, but about 25% will come from revenue increases. That's very aggressive in terms of closing loopholes that are everywhere in the tax code, lowering rates in a certain respect, but you're going to get $1 trillion of new revenue. So this was something that was just voted down yesterday, I think in Grover Norquist again said there's $1 trillion in new revenue in there, ain't going to happen. No. If the Obama administration were to embrace something like that, which to date they haven't,
Right.
do you think there's potential for that getting done, or no? Republicans are still going to hold the line and insist on, essentially what they're putting forward right now.
From a budget standpoint, from a deficit standpoint, the United States of America has a tremendous problem with spending too much money. We keep bankrupting our kids, saying, okay, well, $1 trillion deficit this year, okay, our kids have got to pay, our grandkids will have to pay. Then we do it year after year after year. That's a spending problem, okay? So the revenue can be tweaked here and there. We might be able to get rid of certain deductions. We might be able to do, something, even in the Ryan budget. You're having a little more revenue, okay? So that's a possibility, and there are some things to do. But for every $1 in increase in revenue, we should have $10 decrease in spending. Spending is the problem. There's no question about it. And I think if Mr. Obama got reelected, there's no stopping what that man will do. From a total extremist standpoint, because of a few things. Number one, he'll veto anything, that he doesn't like. And then you won't get 2/3 in both houses to be able to overcome it. The other thing is he uses in a very deceptive and deceitful way regulations, in the EPA and the DEA and every organization, the Energy Department, everything, in order to implement what he truly believes is a human being, which is more government is better for the people. And
let me just jump in because I'm just about out of time.
Yeah.
Didn't get an opportunity to talk about Governor Scott in the state here, so I'll just quickly ask in 10 seconds if you could tell me how you think he's doing, because again, he had a lot of support of it.
I think he's doing a great job. There are a few different things we would have liked to have seen. We think jobs is number one. And he is doing his utmost as a businessman to get more jobs. And that's very important for this state. But we also see the problem is they didn't attack illegal aliens. And illegal aliens is a job issue.
Steve, I wish I had another half an hour to
Well,
follow up
ask me
on
back.
it. I will, but my 30-minute slot is, and maybe I'd love to have you back on the show. So it's about wraps it up for this edition of Focus One. Thank you to METV for your support of the show, and thank you to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again next week.